to our next session, and that will be a panel discussion with members of Google's internal employee-created Black UX group. So I'm now going to hand it over to Keita Wangari and have you take it away. Thank you.
Hey, can you guys hear and see me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right, awesome. Hey, well, thank you, first of all, for inviting us to be here. We kind of heard about this vibe that you guys had going with the state of Black UX, and we're really excited about it. And we're really, really happy to be invited to participate. So we're here to just share some of our stories and a little bit about our roles and a little bit of advice. So I'm going to introduce the panel. I'm Keita, as you mentioned. I'm a cross-Google UX researcher, and I collaborate with teams all over Google on strategic research studies that help continuously improve how Google's top products work together. Also have with me Rachelle Jackson. Is Rachel on? Say hi if you are. She is a UX designer. Hey. She's a UX designer for the Google Cloud Business Platform, where she designs experiences for Google Cloud partners. And she works cross-functionally to provide tools for partners to manage Google Cloud customers and help them optimize and differentiate their business. Rachelle Canty, there Rachelle. He's a UXR lead for equity engineering, where he spearheads the development of tools and methods that will enable product teams throughout the Alphabet ecosystem to create the most equitable experiences for everybody that uses the company's products and services. And we also have Giles Harrison-Conwill. He's a UX research manager and a UXR lead at YouTube, where he works on social distribution and fan engagement research. He focuses on systems, tools, and practices that contribute to building communities online. And we also have Dr. Chyna Hill, a senior user experience researcher leading product inclusion efforts across ads. Dr. Hill's work focuses on creating inclusive and equitable experiences for underrepresented groups. Dr. Alisha Alleyne is a UX research manager and UXR lead for Google's Chrome Trust and Safety team. She leads a multi-site international team of researchers focused on building the best possible web experiences for people across the globe. And we've got Yakka Murphy, and she is a UX design manager currently leading in the Google Nest entertainment space with a background in numerous design areas, including multi-surface interactions, smart home ecosystems. And she's responsible for Chromecast and Google TV speakers and Google Cast UX. So that was a mouthful there. As you can see, we've got a few different roles. We've got research, we've got design from various areas of Google. And as you'll see, as we talk more, we have different tenures here as well. We have people who have been at Google for less than a year, and people who, myself, I've been at Google for 7 years. So I am just going to jump right in with our questions. So I wanted to have some of our panel members share their unique paths to Google. So for me, I'll just say briefly, mine was fairly unique in that I was in my 40s already when I just completely changed careers and got a master's in HCI, and my first job out of getting that master's was at Google. So that was, I came into Google as a lot older than some of the other Googlers. But I want to ask Yakka, could you share what your unique or non-traditional path to Google was?
Awesome. Thanks so much for the great intro as well, Keita. Appreciate it. So really happy to be here. I love telling my story because I struggled a lot early on, and it really opened my eyes to why we really need to keep an eye out for those that come from a non-traditional background. I wasn't really engaged in high school. I wasn't the greatest student. It wasn't because I wasn't intelligent. It was because I just wasn't interested in the dynamics of high school. And so I spent a lot of time not being there. And then throughout that time, I did have a counselor who recognized that I had potential because I was doing graffiti and cutting class, really going to the nearest computer I could find, and really guided me into school for art school. So she really caught me just in time for like not wasting my high school days. But From there, I went to the Art Institute of Atlanta. I started with a degree in computer animation. I went back for multimedia, which was coding and design. And really from being engaged to that point, I wasn't a career student. I was only in school for maybe 3 years. And from there, I've worked on everything from broadcast design, print design, smart watch design, big screen TV design. So it's really been exciting to take that path.
Great story, Yakka. Thanks for sharing that. What about you, Rachelle? I know you have a pretty unique story as well.
Yeah, so for me, I'm from a primarily Black and Puerto Rican neighborhood in Brooklyn. But in high school, in honors courses, I was a minority in those courses. And I noticed that, often coming back in our discussions, that my white peers, they were getting help at home from their parents, from their brothers, their sisters, and they had each other to talk about these complex ideas with. And so I went and eventually wound up going into cognitive psychology. Before that, initially, I was going to be a marine biologist. I was enamored by the prospect of being in the water and just being a Black marine biologist. But when I finally arrived at cognitive psychology, it was really about building learning environments, learning technologies that would start from how it is that the children in my community understand mathematics, experience math concepts, experience science concepts, and in building learning experiences based on that. And I didn't quite have it right yet. Cognitive psychology wasn't for that. The learning sciences was something that was closer, but even then, I was seeing people 30, 40 years in the game winning Lifetime Achievement Awards. But I'm looking still at the community and saying, what's going on with nothing? I don't see the impact. I don't see how these people are being lauded with all these rewards when the needle is moved so little. Some point, I was working on a postdoc, and this group out in New York and in Pittsburgh reached out to me. They wanted me to do research with toddlers. They were developing a social learning app for like second generation iPad. When I started doing the work, they brought me in, but at the same time, I recognized that the way that I was working in academic research as a scientist was very different than what was taking place in design. But by working with designers, I've kind of found my community. I figured these people, design is solving problems, building futures practically. And that's where I needed to be. And that's ultimately what led me into design.
Great, thanks for sharing, Rachelle. Alisha, you're fairly newer to Google. What was your path?
Yes, absolutely. So this is month 5, and my background is in academia and also clinical psychology. While in graduate school, I was a therapist along the way. So I did do therapy on behalf of children and families. And so there was no way you could have told me I would have ended up at Google. I just didn't see how the dots would be connected. But my career journey led me to multiple chapters. I ended up diving into market research. I really liked eventually getting a taste of product research. I like the concept of being able to research, build, and create, and then see something out there in the world sooner rather than later, especially on behalf of the people that we were doing research on behalf of. And totally still admire all my colleagues who are in academia. It just always used to take a while. It used to take a while to publish. It used to take a while to see the fruit of all the hard work that we were putting into our work. And so I eventually ended up finding a way to pursue that path and ended up in technology. And I have to say, a lot of the skills translate: understanding people, understanding everyday problems, how to help people navigate those, understanding how to get someone from point A to point B. And especially with everything that we're all going through right now, having this background in clinical psychology helps me better relate, show active empathy, show listening, show care, and make sure that people are taking care of themselves. And all that translates both as a people manager within Google, a researcher, and then also just someone who loves to learn. And because my background isn't in technology, I'm always in a state of learning, which I really, really enjoy.
Yeah, I can definitely see the connections there. Well, we're happy to have you in month 5, Alisha. Giles, what about you? You have a unique path as well.
Yeah, thanks, Keita. And sorry, folks, I can't turn my camera on, but you know, omnipotent voice. It's pretty fun. So I've been at Google for about 5 years, and I guess I kind of have a background that I think is slightly different, but in some ways, and also similar to some of the stuff you've already heard. So kind of grew up in many places. Moved around quite a bit as a kid. So like at some point, coming to like college, one of the things that was like super exciting for me was this idea that I'm presented with these classes like anthropology, sociology, found that these were the places where I felt most excited, felt like, you know, if I wasn't excited, I cannot excel. And so like, I just kind of found something that worked for me, and ended up studying anthropology as an undergraduate and pursued that through the sort of doctorate level. I got to the end of my studies and found myself wondering, like, how is it that I sort of take these things that I've been learning about, which at the time was about citizenship and democracy in Latin America for the most part. And I was thinking, like, how do I actually apply this? Most of my training was really preparing me to be a professor, but I didn't really see a lot of like application and action in the sort of life ahead. So I started thinking towards the end of my program, which might have been, you know, a bit late to start thinking this, but like, where's the pivot? So I started trying to figure out, you know, ways to continue life as a researcher outside of academia. One of the places that I ended up finding a foothold was in market research and consumer research. So I did consumer research for a bit, but I also found that in a lot of ways, like organizations were still trying to make sense of what anthropology was. They had a sense of, which anthropology is what I studied. People had a sense of like ethnography and certain tools that were part of the anthropologist's toolkit could be valuable. I don't think they really understood what, how and why, but it did open some doors for me. And so I found myself like very early in my career tossed into these situations where I was told to do UX research before I knew what UX was. So I don't know, few years in, I figured out a couple of things after switching between some roles that were kind of like consumer research focused, UX focused. I decided that for the most part, I would much rather be in the world of helping to define what a product is, making sure that a product actually kind of like serves its users. And I really enjoyed also helping teams think about like, who are your users in a way that might also challenge those teams. But for the most part, yeah, like I found my way to Google. Maybe I can't even tell how many years into my career, but it was certainly after at least, you know, 2 to 3 stops, and found myself at home in a sort of design organization where now I manage other researchers and conduct research myself and enjoying it.
Great, thanks for sharing that story. Yeah, somebody who's been at Google for a little while now. I mean, not as long as some people. I definitely have colleagues that are 15 years in, 20 years in, and I'm only on year 7. But I wanted to talk to a few of the newer people on the panel that are newer to Google, just to maybe share for, you know, people that might be considering either Google or a company like Google, a big tech company. How does the reality of your everyday work, so what you really are doing when you get to work every day, how does it compare to what you had envisioned before you came in? And so I want to start with Rachel. How does it compare to what you thought about before coming to Google?
Yeah, thanks, Keita. I am Rachelle, and for me, it's definitely lived up to expectations in many ways. Just hearing the previous participants talk about their journey to Google and UX, it reminds me that there's no direct path to it. And even from my own experience, similar to Giles, came from a marketing research background, business background, and then like you, Keita, did a career change. And so when I was doing that, everyone always talks about like Google is where you want to be if you want to do user experience. And the stories you hear about how the environment is collaborative and the commitment to design thinking. So when you get here, you're excited about seeing all of that. And so I think in a lot of ways, the reality has lived up to that, being able to see that in play, the collaborative environment, the respect and support of user experience, and the impact of design. That's not to say that you don't have to evangelize your work and advocate for what you're doing, but there is this level of that design and UX actually plays a pivotal part in how the business operates and how teams form and actually make products and services that our customers and consumers want. So for me, that has been very fulfilling, coming from other companies that may not have really even understood what UX is. I mean, there is, even though the field is kind of maturing, there's still some sects and companies that don't really fully grasp the work that we do as researchers and designers. So being able in an environment that supports that and understands that and allows you to grow into that has been positive.
Yeah, great. That's great to hear that these that excitement, that to collaborate, like you haven't been let down, at least in that respect. What about you, Chyna?
Yeah, so I came from academia as well. I wasn't sure quite what to expect, but I will say one of the reasons that I chose the academy initially is because it was flexible, and I meant sometimes you had meetings, but for the most part, you wrote when you wrote, you showed up to meetings and you scheduled them. I didn't think that life could be any more flexible than that. And then I came to Google. And then there are some people who are like, from 9 to 12, don't schedule meetings because I got to take care of my kid. And I was like, oh, or I need 30 minutes. I got to go walk the dog. Or I don't want to start work until noon today. So I'm going to start work at noon. Sometimes I might get up at 2 in the morning and get a head start, right? But I didn't think it got any more flexible than what I had, the schedule I had in academia. And then money. I feel like I asked for $100K for a research study in academia. There's all sorts of loopholes and hurdles. I say that now to my manager, nobody blinks. They're like, okay, no problem. So I wasn't used to having access to the resources that I have now, especially to study underrepresented groups. And my work focused a lot on underrepresented groups. And I have money to support that now. Wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I've got similar stories. I was quite shocked at how the availability of funding when I got to Google to do research compared to other places I had been. Thanks for sharing that, Chyna. Alisha, what about you? How does it compare to what you had envisioned before getting to Google?
For sure. Well, first, I'll also second a lot of what I heard earlier. There is total buy-in, partnership, seat at the table, even openness to us building the table when it comes to UX and UXR. Just a wholehearted understanding that it's really important to be thinking about people first. So that's something that I expected, and that has definitely lived up to my expectations. I'd say something that I've been pleasantly surprised by in a really great way was I'm onboarding to tech. I most recently came from big tech, onboarding in tech that can last 5-6 months on average. And I wasn't expecting onboarding remotely, onboarding from home for safety reasons, not going to the office. I wasn't expecting the level of warmth and connectedness. You can only do so much when you're online, and somehow my fellow team members, fellow Googlers in general, just made me feel embraced, recognized, and celebrated over email, over chat, all the above. And that is no small feat during a time like this, where it's very difficult to connect with others. So I was very pleasantly surprised by that, and also really appreciated, and this was mentioned earlier, being able to talk about who you are outside of work, and for people to care about that. I happen to like to swim, so sometimes I'm like, I can't make that meeting because I'm going to swim, and that's okay, right? There's an understanding, especially now more so than ever. You have to take care of yourself. You have to take breaks. We have wellness days. Just this understanding that for us to be our best selves and for us to do our best work, you have got to respect who we are outside of work. I think that's incredibly important. And one other thing that I think I was very pleasantly surprised by, especially being a woman of color, being in big tech, is immediately, as soon as I joined, people having an openness to my ideas, my opinions, my thoughts. I try to defer and say, well, I don't know how you typically do things. And I really like that there was a very clear embracing of my thoughts, my expertise, and understanding who I was, and not assuming that they had already figured everything out. So a very healthy sense of humility, which was awesome.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, no one spoke to anything something that didn't live up to their expectations. So that's good to hear. I will say one thing that did not, well, I won't say it didn't live up to my expectations, but I didn't expect that there's such a variety inside of Google, from very well-established areas like maps and search to places that feel just like a startup. So, you have this flexibility of being able to move around. And if you like the startup feel, you can still be at Google as big as it is, and still have that very small team feel, or you can just, be a part of one of the bigger areas. So that was something I wasn't expecting, and I thought was a good thing. I want to talk about just the skills that you would advise people to focus on if they're looking to be successful at a place like Google. I want to, just ask a few of you, what skill helps you most in your role, and that you would recommend that students or early career designers would develop? And I want to start with you, Rachelle.
Can I, Keita, without changing the question up too much, talk about a disposition that we have to foster coming into the space. We need agency. To be successful, you have to feel this sense of agency and empowerment, because what we're doing, we're trying to bring new things into existence. But in order to do that, there are a number of things that you have to clear. There are people that you have to build relationships with, right? And so it's being able to come into the space, know that you're doing more than just doing your job and just expressing, manifesting a technical skill set. You're in this world of approximately 160,000 employees, and everyone is contributing, but sees, to some end goal, but maybe sees it a little differently. And so coming in and being able to exert influence, know how to influence and clear things and create things in order to take these ideas that you have, that you're working on, and get the buy-in that you need. That's something that I had to learn. It took me about two years to figure that out, right? So that I can come in with a sense of agency, and in essence, you become the owner. You become the owner of these things that you're creating, and you try to put energy behind them, and use energy, distribute energy throughout the company in order to make these things more tangible, to make them viable and be perceived as being viable by leadership, and as well as other teams. So I think, the technical skill set you find at Google, everyone is solid for the most part, technically, but the people who really exceed are those who are able to bring some sense of agency to their role. They're really trying to, they understand how it is that you bring these ideas into existence.
Yeah, great point. Thanks for sharing that. Giles, what about you? What would you add to that?
That's great. I'm going to piggyback on Rachelle a little bit, because thinking about sort of like what the way that we even frame and think about our jobs is really helpful. I'm a UX researcher. I do not see the core of my job as being about making stuff. I think my job is primarily to influence. So while I'm thinking about product, that's part of my world, I'm also thinking about what are the systems beyond, let's say, a feature that my team is very interested in. How do we build systems that lead us to a specific, let's say, ideal future that we're all grasping for, right? That could mean that I need to focus on how the organization, develops its own processes, how our team works. It could be about me influencing the way that leadership in an organization like YouTube thinks about this big machine that we are building. So in a lot of ways, my sort of goals, the things that determine my success are really how do I get into the right room? How do I get the right people to listen? And how do I get them to make decisions that kind of lead to the sort of future that I'm helping to envision? That being the case, I think that, when it comes to making decisions, a great deal of what we need to be able to do is just manage information. We need to be able to determine what's important, what's not important. And to me, the most valuable thing that I'm sort of bringing from this background, the training that I have, I would say it is not the research methodologies that I learned. It is not, how to answer or ask questions. The thing that's most important is learning how to consume information in a way that a graduate program should teach you, I think. So what I mean is that if you are pursuing a master's or PhD, at some point you've had to learn how to read literatures. You don't read books, you don't read articles, you read in order to consume large amounts of information so that you can make those connections. And so bringing this into a workplace like Google, a place where there's a wealth of information that can be intimidating, like being able to figure out how do you connect that to goals, to other literatures, which could be the sort of documentation that other organizations are creating. So just being able to sort of consume information at scale and figure out what to do with it quickly is extremely valuable, especially in a world where we have reorgs, we have people finding new jobs within the company, and you will repeat this sort of process of having to figure out where you are. And yeah, that's the thing that I consider the most valuable thing that I've brought with me from this background.
Great, thank you, Giles. Yakka, do you want to quickly add something to that? I still had a couple more questions that I want to get to Rachelle and Chyna, but what would you add?
Actually, I'm mindful of time, and I think that we're all on the same page because I'm basically plus $1 million on that. I think the ability to connect with people is like the most valuable relationship building, cultivating partnerships, whether you're designing, collaborating, or presenting a vision or strategy to your peers or leadership, there's tremendous value in connecting with your audience. So think authenticity, strong storytelling, persuasive speaking. And then I just note that this is not just powerful for being inside the building. Like when interviewing, this is key. This will show your value when you're interviewing. If you're an entrepreneur and you're looking to get people to invest in your ideas, this is also going to be tremendously powerful there. So really just +1 on the rest of the team there.
Great, thank you. I before we wrap up, because I know we just have a few minutes left, I just wanted to, we're all, have the pandemic and everything. And, for us at Google, we're, getting that call now. It's been announced to come back into the office and we're doing a hybrid. I just wanted to check in with a couple of our newer Googlers that I know were hired during the pandemic. How has the pandemic really affected your work at Google and how you think about just your career in general in UX? So I want to start with you, Rachelle.
Yes, thanks. I think the word was said earlier, flexibility, and just thinking about when you think about your career, that it doesn't have to be this same trajectory or set in stone path, that I can decide that maybe I want a hybrid work week right now, but maybe in the future, I want to switch to be completely remote. So the pandemic has really allowed a lot of us to really think about what does that mean to fit work into our lives versus work and keeping life separate, or trying to, as some people say, do it all or balance it all. How do you actually make it intertwine into your life experience? So that is a decision you can make at each phase of your life. So for me, that's the thing I've kind of now recognized, like this is an opportunity for me to really think about at what stage I am and what works best for me. And having that flexibility is actually very, for me, comforting, and also a thing that allows us to, I think, do greater work because we know that we don't have to worry about that as much.
Hey, what about you, Chyna?
I will say I'm an introvert, so having the ability to work remote, I have thrived. I have lived my absolute best life at home. But I started at Google during the pandemic and everyone was remote. But what I will say is it didn't feel like that because they were like, hey, I'm making fish and chips. Do you want to come up, or do you want to come over, or do you want to come over for afternoon tea? And the first time I visited Mountain View, like my coworker who I've never met in life was like, just stay with me. You don't need a hotel. And I'm like, y'all are weird. But I've gotten used to that dynamic. Like, who invites a stranger to stay with them, right? But I've worked remote, but it hasn't felt like that. Or we have Thursday meetings where we play Pictionary and charades, or we build Legos, and there's wine dine Wednesdays. It hasn't felt like I've been away from these people. I'm excited to go back into the office. I'm still going to be remote because I'm still introverted and I love my space. But the fact that those options are there have been wonderful for me. Like, I've thrived.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone, to our panelists. And I know we're at time, so thank you for having us and inviting us to share.
Keita, thank you so much for moderating that. And also thanks to all the panelists for telling us about your experience at Google, but then also, I think, bringing up some themes that are applicable to a variety of workplaces, particularly in industry. So thank you very much for your time and your effort.